This is the cradle of mankind. More early man fossils have been found here in South Africa than any other place on Earth. Here at Rising Star Cave, two enthusiastic cavers, Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker, were about to make the discovery of a lifetime.
I'd probably been in and out of this cave about 20 times, and I thought I knew every inch of it. And on one Friday night, Rick Hunter and I came to see if there was anything interesting. And we climbed up this very bad climb, the Dragon's Back. It's like 20 meters high with sheer drops on either side. And Rick was taking some GoPro footage. I was basically getting in his way. He asked me to move into a little crack so that he could step over me. And as I climbed into this little crack straight below me, I noticed that on the one side, the crack was going down further. So I climbed down it, and it just continued and continued going down for 12 meters in this very narrow, jagged shaft. I got to the bottom, and suddenly a big chamber opened up in front of me with pristine white stalactites hanging off the floor, and I immediately called Rick down because I was getting excited. We had discovered something new in the cave. But that wasn't all we discovered. We walked into the chamber a couple of meters and started on the floor. We started to notice fossils. So on that very night, Lee Berger told me that my life was going to change forever.
Lee Berger, research professor at the Evolutionary Studies Institute of the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa, headed up the project, calling for Institute scientists around the globe who were both qualified and small enough to climb into the Naledi fossil chamber.
That looked great down there.
Yeah, brought up a couple little fragments.
Dr. Marina Elliott was the first scientist to enter the Naledi chamber here.
Don't be coy.
So the first time I sort of slid through that hallway into the open area where the chamber is and sort of started looking around, you know, you're only wearing a headlamp, so you just see flashes, but every flash of my headlamp showed bone. So I think right at that point I realized that we had a lot more than the original photographs actually had portrayed. So that was pretty exciting.
When we actually got into the chamber and could start removing it, we realized that not only was there one individual lying there on the surface, but the floor was literally comprised of Homo Naledi. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of remains down in those chambers. And all you have to do is sweep the surface off, and there they are.
To date, over 18,000 fossils of Homo Naledi have been discovered in the Rising Star Cave system.
Homo naledi isn't really similar to any known hominid species in its entirety of its package, but it's almost like you've got little bits and pieces of almost everything we've ever found. Parts of the skull, if you just look at it quickly, look a little bit like Homo erectus. Of course, got a very small brain. Other parts of the skull look very modern, like Homo sapiens.
The fossils showed that Homo Naledi had a small skull, and that many of its features were archaic.
It gets stranger and stranger as you move down the body. You get the ape-like shoulders, you get these more and more human-like arms, which end with a hand that's human proportion. This is a much smaller hand than mine. When I put the wrist bones in place and then place it in my palm, you'll see that the thumb is almost the length of my thumb, yet my hand is clearly, obviously a lot bigger. So that was the first thing. Big thumb. And the final strange thing about this hand is how curved it is. And I don't really need to do anything to demonstrate that, except hold this cast up and show you the extreme curvature. That curvature is as great as the most primitive members of our lineage. When we first discovered Homo naledi, the idea was based on its morphology that it was going to be millions of years old. That meant we couldn't even guess what the age of Homo naledi was. That led us on a search for laboratories and specialists around the world that would either invent technology, improve technology to date these fossils.
One of the scientists tasked with the complexity of determining an accurate age for the newest member of the human family was Dr. Renaud Johannes Boyu of Southern Cross University in Australia. He's a specialist in electron spin resonance, or ESR dating, which can determine the age of Homo naledi teeth by measuring the natural radiation they have absorbed over time.
ESR dating is the only one that can go back in time sufficiently to actually cover human evolution and date directly the fossil. Most of the other technique will date the sediments around the fossil, and then you have to assume that the age of the fossil is the same as the dating of the sediments around.
ESR analyzes the behavior of electrons within the crystalline structures of the tooth and can determine from this very accurately how many years the tooth has absorbed the Earth's natural radiation, and so provide a date to the fossil. By dating the actual teeth, an accurate age for Homo naledi could be determined. Initially, its age was estimated to be between 1 and 2 million years old, in the same range as this nearby find of Australopithecus sediba. But the new dating technology was about to astound the world.
I was actually at the London Natural History Museum, and Homo naledi was on the wall, and then there was estimated age between 1.2 and 1.8 million years. But then, when we actually did the scientific dating of those teeth, this is when things got very interesting, because then we got an age of 200 to 300,000 years old. So much, much younger in human evolution, actually overlapping with Homo sapiens.
When we got a date, it was much younger than that, 250,000 years, give or take, we realized that we were dealing with a primitive creature, almost like a time traveler, that had come down from deep time. The species clearly originates there. That's where its morphology originates. And had come down through time invisible to us in the fossil record to a point where it is very possible that Homo naledi was in direct contact with the emergence of modern humans. We never thought that was possible in Africa. Until this moment, we thought that there was effectively, during that entire time period of the Middle Pleistocene, late Middle Pleistocene, one form, a big-brained form of Homo sapiens. Now there are two, and that adds incredible complexity to our record. Homo naledi comes out equidistant from, for example, Homo erectus, as it does from Homo sapiens. Homo naledi would be an equally likely ancestor to modern humans as Homo erectus.
The anatomy isn't lying to us. It's telling us something real. Naledi comes from a very ancient time. Naledi was the size of a very small human. It stood about 1.3, 1.4 meters at the most. And yet, its legs were relatively long in that. And that tells us that it was probably a very effective long-distance walker, possibly a runner. It was moving around the landscape in an entirely human-like way. And that's really fascinating, because it may not have been the only human-like creature on this landscape. Archaic humans, or even early modern humans, might have been here at the same time.
Homo naledi may also have buried their dead. The fossils were often intact, held together by soft tissue.
There was none of the typical damage. We could see that it wasn't a mass death. We could see that water hadn't washed them in there. And what was, I guess, most remarkable is they were alone. They were the only species in it. And we came to the conclusion, obviously, that this was perhaps a deliberate body disposal site.